Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on startup, a World Talent Economy Forum in Emerging Economy with the help of research and innovations. We are developing entrepreneurship ecosystem. So startup is a very important subject and topic for us. So we can learn many interesting aspects from Mr. David Schumacher, Mr. Eric, Madam Viva, Mr. Rob, and Mr. Jason. First, I would like to give chance Mr. David Schumacher.
Yeah, hello everyone. Startups, yes, that does seem like that would be quite appropriate for everything that you have going on in your world, Sharif. I know with research and work with the universities and so forth, startups can definitely benefit by that. Of course, a startup is a business in, the first stages of formation. And a lot of times they're thought of as an entrepreneurial endeavor. I've been involved with a few, as I'm sure other panelists that we have here today have as well. It usually starts with an idea, either with the intent of generating ideas for some type of entrepreneurial product or service, or you already have one, and then the next stage that you need to get into is doing a little market research to see whether your idea is potentially viable, and that means flushing it out with a business plan. So that business plan market research is really where you take the idea from a good idea to something that potentially has business possibilities to it. If it does, then at that point, if you haven't already, but at that point you'd want to put together some type of legal entity for your project. Here in the United States, that might be a limited liability company or a corporation, and then the more traditional partnerships, even sole proprietorships. This is going to vary based on where you live and what those particular laws are and what type of product or service this entrepreneurial endeavor is going to undertake. However that works out, it's going to require funding, getting your licenses, getting legally set up, being able to conduct the initial operation of the business and starting to build a team. It's going to require funding. So funding is another cycle to look at. So you've got your idea, you think you can make money at it, you've set up a legal entity. Maybe you start with your own funds, bootstrapping as it's called, or whatever your initial funds come from. The team aspect is important because, at least today, I think it's really hard for one or two people to do it all. You need to be able to have the different aspects of the team to build this prototype to start with, if you want to call it that, of a product or a service, sometimes called a minimum viable product, that you can put out there for test to prove or disprove your assumptions in your business plan and the validity of your market research. Do you have an appropriate audience? Is this product or service that you have going to meet those needs, and it's going to be competitive in that marketplace? And it's probably going to require a number of iterations before you have something that you really want to launch on a wide scale. So there's a lot to it. If you make it that far, then marketing and growth of the product becomes the main endeavor as you continue to make minor alterations to it as you go. And constantly you need to be monitoring how the product is performing, how it's being received, and being able to adapt to whatever situations that come up. And as everyone on this panel, I'm sure, can tell you, situations will come up and you will need to adapt. So there's a real broad brush overview of startup and what it takes perhaps to get one going. And there's a lot more conversation that can be had at each one of those stages, Dr. Sharif.
Thank you. Now I request Mr. Eric.
Well, I was doing a event. I did 17 of the events where I got government, industry and academia to work the same problem at the same time, deliver good systems fast as opposed to compliant systems slowly for the government. And as we were doing this, we had big companies like IBM and Northeast. And we had these little companies coming in that nobody'd ever heard of. And I noticed that some of the times in situations, some of these little companies were running circles around the big companies. And I was asking, well, what are you doing? But they're not. And they said, well, we're doing this thing called lean manufacturing. We've invented by Toyota. We perfected it, and we call it lean startup. And it was just this idea of failing fast, just moving on. So I became interested in that and said, so what is it about these startup companies? And I asked, what's the difference between startup companies and every other company? And they said, well, a lot of people who are starting a company say they're doing a startup company, but they're just starting a company. So I said, what? And they said, well, if you could go to the shelf and pull out a blueprint, you're pretty much just starting a company. Like if you start a McDonald's, the blueprint's there. A lot of the risk has been taken by scale and training and support. And say so those are business people who evaluate the risks and say, I'm going to do this. And then there's other businesses like a restaurant where you could go to the Small Business Administration, find somebody who'd done one, and they could lay out the risk and you could kind of quantify them. There's still a chance. I mean, restaurants are, but at least you know what the risks are. The risk of not getting the advertising, all that, people, finding the right people. And most restaurants, as an example, are just trying to survive for the first 3 years till the customer and the operations match everything. But the thing is, with these companies, these people were starting blueprint. You couldn't go to SBCA and say, how do I start Uber? How do I do that? How do I start Google? They couldn't tell you because there was no franchise, nobody done one before. So they said, we start these companies realizing the fact that those companies are the goal is for that company to go away. Because if you said, how do you design a company for Uber before it existed, nobody could say, oh, you've got your background check department, you've got your software which does that. Nobody could tell you because nobody's done it. So you don't really know what the company would look like. So in that case, you have to start a company to figure out what the company will be. And a lot of times people are great at starting companies, but they're not good at taking a company once it's working. Uber is an example of that. Running that thing, it's a different skill set. Some people can make a transition, but a lot of people, that's all they do. They start a company, go, that's good, then they start another one. So because the imprint, and so to get the money to invest in some of these companies, sometime has the pressure to deliver returns almost immediately. They want to see this unicorn-like growth pattern because they typically don't invest in one company. They invest in a portfolio, realizing that a bunch of them are going to be out of business. Some are just going to be eking along, maybe making money, and maybe one or two will go big that'll pay for all the other ones. So that's things is if you have to take investor money for it, then there's a huge pressure to perform, and it provides a lot of stress, which some people really like. I started an Internet of Things company with 4 25-year-old kids and an older sales guy, and we actually didn't take investor money. We took bridge loans and would get a job, get a loan to deliver on that job, pay it off, use proceeds to roll back into the company. So to me, that's the biggest thing in my mind that sets up as these startup companies is you're doing something that you can't to write the blueprint as you go, as opposed to borrowing one and customizing it. So, standard business person is able to evaluate most of the risk. An entrepreneur will tweak something to take a few risks. 90% of them don't survive. So that's a sad truth is most of them don't end up where they started, or they're out of business. So I think that's kind of a good perspective, is to think about what's the difference. It's really, do you have a blueprint, and how much risk is there in doing this is one of the guidelines to think about.
Thank you, Madam Viva.
Yes, well, as people may or may not know, I have a startup, and it's a mature startup because we came to the market before there was actually a market. So we've been around for a while. One of the things that we've been able to do with our prototypes is, determine our output and get all of our costs of goods sold figured out pretty fine-tuned for planning for different kinds of capital. So I just want to touch on that briefly, because I think entrepreneurs that may be listening, you need to know that there are expensive forms of capital and then cheaper forms of capital. So one of the opportunities that is heavily utilized and is now scaled up industrially is the angel networks. And for the most part, angels and VCs are a more expensive form of capital. So if there are opportunities for entrepreneurs to do non-dilutive financing of different stages of their technology or their company services, they should try to do that because of the high cost of that. Or if you can get away with it and you can find a way to do it, issue bonds or notes with smaller investors and bigger investors, because you can, the interest rate and the rate of return is a little more affordable for your company. The reason you want to know your numbers in your company really well is so that you can evaluate what kind of price you have to place on your product or service based on the capital that is going to come into the company. So if you can refine that number, then you're going to know your own risks. Angel capital is high risk capital for them. It's high risk for you as well too, because your trajectory to profit and return on investment is a steep slope, and there's a lot of pressure with that. I think a lot of entrepreneurs are into a new ecosystem where they don't actually go into those circles because of all of those issues. And so this is not a bad thing. I think looking for other alternatives is a sensible thing to do, especially if you don't want to pass on the costs of the expensive capital to your consumer or your client. So I just wanted to touch on that briefly, Sharif. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ra.
So over the years, I've done a number of startups, and the thing that you need to remember is you got to love what you're doing to do a startup. If you're thinking that doing a startup is going to get you rich, don't do a startup, because if it's about the money, you'll never put in the effort you need to be successful. Doing a startup means 7-hour weeks, 18-hour days. It can be a lot of fun. You can form a lot of bonds. You can also discover what it's like to be in a disaster. More startups fail by far than succeed. So there's a lot of risk to it as well. I've had a lot of friends do startups where they basically worked for free in exchange for maybe future stock options or benefits, and then those things never merged, and all they did were spend a couple of years of their life in a startup. Now, it's good experience. The experience you get in a startup can be very impressive, because you'll end up doing a lot of things you wouldn't have done in a larger company. A startup, people are spread very thin. You have a variety of duties. You generally won't be cubbyholed, because pretty much everybody's got to kind of do or be able to do almost everything, because you've got such a small staff. The key is really to look at the goal. Where's the company going? Where are you going? And making sure, if you're in a management position, that you've got a a core set of critical skills, and you can outsource some of this stuff. Don't feel that you have to do accounting yourself. Certainly, you're not going to be doing legal yourself. You'll outsource that to an attorney. But don't feel that you actually have to in-staff everything, or staff up everything. You can outsource a lot of the things that you don't know about, and sometimes it's better rather than bringing on board a bunch of people that say they're accountants and having them do accounting, or one person that's an accountant if it's something you don't know well. It may be better to just have an accounting firm cover it, because they'll hold to normal accounting principles and practices, and you're less likely to have somebody just really screw up your books. And that's one of the big issues with regard to a startup, is generally the skills you have aren't broad enough to cover everything you need to do. And so finding advisors, finding help, making sure that you're well-versed in asking a question as opposed to guessing what the answer is going to serve you very well. A lot of the startups I've seen really fail because people have an idea of how something is done, and it has nothing to do with reality. And there are people out there that know how to get it done. Viva mentioned about the different forms of financing. The debt financing early on can be problematic because you've got to manage your debt service, and often you've got to go for a period of time without a whole lot of revenue. And what also often happens is people start off by not asking for enough money, or not using good judgment on how to spend their resources, so they burn through their capital before they ever have a product to market. And I've seen some crazy stuff. The Panda project years ago, a bunch of guys out of IBM with computing knowledge decided to build a PC company, and suddenly they thought they were all billionaires, and they got private jets and did crazy stuff, and they got a massive amount of capital. I mean, it's millions upon millions of dollars, and they burned right through it before they could get to profitability, and the company failed. So it really does require you to buckle down, be very frugal in the early phases, make sure you ask and know how to ask for enough money if you're going for either equity or debt financing. People there are some risks with regard to equity financing that have to do with control. You can bring in people that will want to tell you how to run your business, and because they have a significant portion of the company, they will be able to do that. That can be problematic if they don't know what it is you want to do or how you're going to do it. And invariably, I've seen a lot of folks lose their companies as a result of that, and it still fails. Once you lose the vision, it's hard to keep a company going. And then one final comment: a lot of people figure it's the idea is the marketable part of the company. It's not. The marketable part of the company is the execution of the firm. And often, it's better to have something running to a certain degree before you go out and start looking for capital investment than try to do it ahead of time. It can be incredibly disappointing to go out unless you're in some kind of a feeding frenzy like we are right now with generative AI. And we were with the internet back in the 90s, where people were throwing money at anybody that had an idea. That happens every once in a while. Most of those companies do fail, and fail rather spectacularly, because it's all about money. So remember to watch for that. But do make sure that you understand it's not the idea that has value. It's whether or not you can execute on the idea that has value. And the closer you get to being able to demonstrate that you can reach profit, that you know that your executive team knows how to manage a company and manage a budget, the better off you're going to be as you go through the various cycles of either asking for a loan or asking for investors. And generally, you're going to want to blend. Too much of one or the other can cause serious problems. But having somebody as an advisor on board early on that understands the finances of the thing can be incredibly important, as well as somebody on board early on that understands what it means to have executive leadership and maybe set a set of policies very early on with regard to how employees treat each other and how you're going to manage the assets of the company are important, and then making sure they're enforced. Those are all rules for doing startups. Most people don't follow them, and that's why most startups fail. But at the end of the day, it's got to be something you love, because you're going to put in a crap ton of effort into this thing. And if you're thinking you're just going to be able to skate through and walk away with a big check, chances are it's going to fail, and you're going to wonder where the money went and wonder how you're going to pay your bills. And that's no way to end these things. So be pragmatic, plan to work your butt off, plan to have a good time doing it, and meeting some friends that may last you a lifetime. But at the end of the day, it's about the experience. It's about the goal. It's not about the money. And then I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Jason.
Thanks. Hey, everybody. I'm broadcasting from a startup that I have. It's a farming operation. Very proud to say this greenhouse lasts in the wintertime in a cold climate, zone 3B, climate zone. And we were able to keep trees alive in here without bringing in, it's just solar thermal. So off to a good start this spring. And farming is a difficult kind of startup. I think it's more Eric's second category of, it's not a startup, farming exists, but it's a hard industry, you know? And I have a theory that very many people who might self-identify as farmers also have another profession that they have to do because like, it's just that competitive. And it's interesting because like you want to live the life you want to live. I've always wanted to like have a sense of a nearby abundance and food and being near to nature, and that you do have to work your butt off, and I recommend doing the hard part first and economizing your time as the startup founder by doing the part that only you can do, actually. And trust your vision, even though it's also wise to balance your vision against the opinions of experts and those who are experienced. I think that it's a word to the wise that experience plus trickery will prevail over an inexperienced, youthful energy. Even a talented, youthful energy, if you have the advantage of youth and energy and talent, that you're going to be competing against experienced people who might exercise trickery, and that you have to give yourself the information advantage in any way you can, possibly. Like, to pull together some of the points made earlier, ensure that you are giving yourself the information advantage as much as you can. Do the market research. Do the market research on your opportunities for capitalizing. Consider maybe direct asset barter capitalizing, even, in that to capitalize, especially during a time frame of expected inflation, using debt is good to crystallize the current purchasing power in the present for an asset that you can add value to, and that your work will improve that, and you'll communicate to another market who is not aware of the value here. So that's sort of the exercise of marketing in the traditional definition. The act of marketing is to connect different places where one has an abundance of a thing and the other has a deficit of it, and that you just connect those supplies to balance the supply and the demand. That's marketing, and that you need to know where there is an abundance and where there is a demand to match it, and where you can add value and do the part only you can do, because that's what it means to capitalize. But it's different to know what it means to economize. To economize is about opportunity cost, and to understand that whatever you're doing in the moment is costing you the opportunity to do anything else that is possible. And so when you commit to a startup, it is a long-term commitment, and you might find yourself around the corner in the future committed to something where your opportunity cost, that's economically what's at stake here. And that the information advantage you get by doing good market research allows you to know the real opportunity cost of the capital that you do have that you can get, right? Do what you can with where you are right now is kind of the idea of being self-employed. And keep your people. I mean, to the very first point made, keep your team, because like retraining people or bringing in new energies is always a team chemistry risk. You never know what you bring in a powerful personality. You know, as someone said, there is no logic to hiring intelligent people and then telling them what to do, quite either. So if you bring in a team member who's strong and they've got a strong personality, you understand that you might change the team chemistry, and they have to be prepared for what's around the corner of that change to the team chemistry. And keep them, because keep them if they're working. If they fit and it's good for your team chemistry, keep them. as much as you can. Like Henry Ford is a great industrialist who believed that anybody involved in the manufacture of the product should be able to comfortably afford that product. And so logic of people building is that they share the passion, and their logic is kind of just that one of these is mine too. And that keeps people in an alignment of incentives that is very sort of smooth in the way of not needing to supervise things or babysit things. And you can trust people to take up their station and do what it is they need to do in their corner, and then it comes together nicely. When people all understand the vision and they believe it because they want it for themselves. And there's no disconnect between your team thinking that they're serving an overclass or an underclass, right? Don't get involved in a business where there's contempt on the team or that there's contempt for the consumer from above or below, right? And that it cuts both directions. So, yeah, it's important to understand your weighted average cost of capital, like in an absolute sense, for how much it's costing in debt versus equity and what your equity is worth in the end, right? Weighted average cost of capital, use both and balance them. And if you do get investor partners, bring in people who are good for your team chemistry, who understand your vision, who want your product too. They want what you are offering approximately, and they don't want to change it for a good partner investor. I can see my connection is getting weaker, so I'll leave it at that for the first round. Pass it along. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. David Schumacher.
Yeah, great comments by all. I took notes here from every panelist that had something of interest for me, and hopefully I'm sure that interest for all of your other viewers as well. But yeah, I love coming and sharing a little bit on these panels and then learning so much more from the other contributions. Shifting back to what I was saying about how to start in a startup and kind of running through the steps. I think it was Rob that also talked about the value of bringing advisors on, and I think that's really true all through the life cycle of the startup. But I think it's very true at the beginning to find advisors that have done something like what you're doing, something similar to what you're doing. Even if you've got a brand new idea that's never been tried before, there's going to be elements of it that are going to resemble other things that are out there in the economy. So you can take your good ideas, you can take what you've done with market research and be able to bounce these off of people that can help you in those specific areas. Perhaps have a board of advisors, if you will, that can help you with different areas, maybe in finance, maybe in marketing. These people, if they've done something like what you're doing, are going to have contacts out in the industry. And if they believe in your product and they see and they're willing to spend some of their time advising you, then you may have access to some of those contacts that you wouldn't have had otherwise, whether that be, well, for any of the different aspects of what you're doing. Take, for example, even when you start your initial hiring to build out your team, it's really good to have people that have done that before or have tried to attract particular types of skill sets and knowing how to do that and which ones to plug together. And to the point that a startup is very thinly staffed, that adds another dimension to picking people to build the team out with, who is adaptable to do that. So hiring key staff positions, I think, is where an advisor can be really helpful. And obviously, when it comes to building partnerships with other businesses that can assist with your business and help you ramp up sales, and advisory staff, advisors in those particular areas are also very helpful. Now, it's also, I think, a good idea to have an agreement, a firm agreement, a contract even with the advisors that you bring on, so that everyone knows exactly what is expected of them, what's allowed of them, because they may be advising a number of different businesses, and you don't want perhaps some of your best ideas going off elsewhere, and you want to make sure that you're going to have an adequate time slot to be able to use the particular advisor. So some type of startup advisory agreement, I think, is a good idea for that. Where do you find these advisors? Well, perhaps you already are working in the industry that you're trying to do a startup in, and you have some ideas of how to approach people that could help you. Wherever you got your education, perhaps the alumni connections that you have might be another way. Perhaps people that you bring in or have partnered with also have other connections. And then there's online communities that you can find that might be able to network you in those ways. However you do it, advisors is going to be a key aspect, I think, in getting your business going and keeping it on the proper track. And that's what I have for now, Dr. Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Eric.
So whenever you're doing, some people think or behave, there's going to be some resistance that throws up. Bottled water, why? Tap water's free. Who'd need that? Medical, you want me to pay for a doctor? I'm not even sick. Why would I pay for a doctor before I'm sick? So the first task of any entrepreneur or startup team is to figure out whether you're right or the world is. They say, oh, that'll never work. So, and that's one of the biggest failures, is not understanding or building the market demand. I mean, you build stuff, but or nobody wants it. That's one of the biggest reasons that startups fail. So you have to test that all the time. And one of the things you could do is test as much before you do anything, which is called prototyping. An example of that, I think, wanted to see a long time ago whether people wanted a dictation machine. And so that'd be a lot of work to type, because back then you couldn't just do like we do, and it's just right built into our computers here. I can do it right now. Back then it'd be a dedicated machine, a lot of work, very expensive. What they did is they brought business, their target market of business people in, and they had them dictate. And as they talked on the screen in front of them, what they sang was radical at the time. And what they found out was that, no one would sit there and do it. It was initially fun and all that, but the time it took, it wasn't a big win. But instead of building the machine, was put a mic and a big screen. They had somebody behind listening and typing as fast as they could. So, and they found out, so that's the money they spent to figure out whether there's another company that wanted to figure out whether to sell it at IKEA. So they just snuck it into IKEA, put it on, see if people would pick it up. Auction and tried to sell it. Sure enough, people picked it up, started walking to the cash registers. They had to chase after and say, no, here, you can have that. It's just a test. But I mean, so there's this idea of prototyping. And then from then, with a lean entrepreneur, you're offering tests and saying, well, is this work? Is this the right feature? No. So because you have limited resources and limited people, you try and test with as little as you have, and you do a lot of them, as opposed to you build something and you put a lot of money in it. Yeah, that didn't work. So what? Let's put another big money in something else till we find so it worked. When I was in the corporate world, I think we spent, $10 to $20 million a year on R&D. Okay, if you have $10 to $20 million a year to spend just on trying things out, well, you could do a lot of that. But when you have a few people with not a, you can't do that. It's figuring out whether you have product market fit. The other thing is, what's your business model to make this rollout production work? Because you have resources and capabilities. Is when you put those resources and capabilities together, you get core competencies. And then what's the activities you do with that core competency gives you the competitive advantage. So you got to get the right resources, the right capabilities of what you can do with those resources, put them together in the right way, put it out, and constantly adjust. So I watched, the company I was at, we bought a lot of startups. So, you're either buying resources and capabilities as core competencies, or you're buying the communications with the market. They talk to people, the customers are in there. It's like when Google bought you technology, they needed their communications with themselves and the market. So had a clear vision, and we would get companies that fit that. We basically bought their resources, man, worked great. But I've seen tons of things where they take these companies because they want that market, and then they say, okay, now we bought the resources, now do the operations, the communications our way, and it fails. Seen it happen again and again. You're taking what made them successful and say, I'm going to plug it into how we do business, and it's not successful. So we brought that up earlier. It's not just product. It's not just the idea. It's the execution of getting that right balance and doing it and getting the communications right. So market demand and business model is important. And I think the last thing is culture. Almost all my friends and said the one thing they would do differently is build culture first, not build the company, then try and put the culture in. So those are some ideas: is get the right market fit, get the right business model, and build the right culture.
Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Madam
Okay.
Viva.
Good. Yeah, the computer at my end is freezing up a little bit. So the other thing I would add in here is for the entrepreneurs to get a good understanding of your basic paperwork, like being able to generate a non-disclosure agreement and tailoring that to different things, different people, different situations. Also being able to do projections for yourself, but also to turn them into bank compliant projections. So other documentary requirements that you might need are, the ability to generate memos for people, and then brochures for talking about the marketing side of your technology. And it's always important to know who you're talking to when you deal with your materials. But I think that a lot of entrepreneurs can actually help their culture if they have a little bit of ability to be good with their paperwork. So it also is a good way to just make sure that you don't forget anything as well too. So I'll leave it at that, Sharif. I got to get going. Thanks a lot for having me on today. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Rob.
Yeah, and to be clear, if anybody else is noticing it, it's actually Eric's feed that's breaking up. I think everybody else is probably coming in through pretty clean. So I'm going to cover 4 things. We had some discussion on advisory councils. I've set up quite a few of these over the years, and there's a trick to it. And the trick is to make sure that the council is balanced. Make sure the people on the council actually get along with each other, and none of them are so convinced that they're the most brilliant person in the room that they don't let anybody else speak, which can happen. You can have, often I've seen advisory councils that are made up of CEOs, and the entire meeting is folks trying to outdo each other, and you don't get any progress that way. Also, spend some time with the advisory councils and having them learn the limits and capabilities of the company. If the advisory council is too isolated from the company itself, their advice will be on things, or at least it will direct you towards things that you can't do. If they understand the limitations of the company, they can couch their advice so that it's actually actionable. So much of the advice that people are given is not actionable, and that can be problematic. And so making sure that the advisory council is engaged. And by the way, it's true of a board as well. Often in an early company, your board of directors is your advisory council. You want to make sure that they're engaged. That part of what the board's there for is to keep you from making mistakes. But if they're not engaged at all, if you're just meeting with them once a year, a couple times a year, and you're having drinks and food and you're not doing much, it's a waste of their time, and it's really a waste of yours as well. They have a purpose. Use them for that purpose. And then finally, if your advisory council mix isn't working out, swap out the people. Nobody has to be there for life. It may take a while or a few iterations to get a council that is functioning together, so that they're a team and not a group of independent contributors. And so work on that and make sure the person that's running the council is somebody that's good at putting teams together. The last thing you need is the person running the council is the person who thinks that they're the smartest person in the room and they have to have an opinion on everything. That can end a council pretty quick as well. So somebody that's used to building teams and somebody that's used to allowing the other members of the council speak, all very helpful. Number two, a common problem in startups is abusive management. I mentioned that people in startups tend to work 7-day weeks, 18-hour days. That's absolutely true. But often you run into cases where management begins demanding that people put in the hours, and they separate from the quality of work. There are folks out there that can in 8 hours do what any other 2 people can do in 18 hours. And those people need to be protected and nurtured. And particularly when it comes to women in startups, there's a real history, particularly in tech, for misogyny and abuse that is just unacceptable. And it can end very badly. In one of the startups I had, we had a number of large judgments because our HR guy, our CEO, and one of our board members couldn't keep it in their pants. That gets expensive and it just burns up your capital. It destroys camaraderie. It can make for a very hostile working environment. So mind your old statement, mind your P's and Q's. But really, in a startup, romance in the company is probably going to be a bad idea because everybody's so close and because reporting structures are such that you can almost always find yourself reporting up to or down to somebody you might be dating. That just makes it ugly. And in a startup, everybody kind of knows. It's not something you keep from anybody else. But that's really ugly. At another startup I was in, the CEO of the startup would come in and he had a windowed office, and then every once in a while a pretty woman would come in and they would drift down below the windows in the office, and you damn well what they're doing. And his wife would show up in a titty every once in a while, trying to catch him in the act. Just that kind of environment is just not good. I got out. When you've got stuff like that going on, don't hang around. Get the hell out. It's going to end badly, and might even end violently. Those kinds of environments. I've been in and around a couple companies where people came in with weapons, with the idea that they were going to shoot somebody. And again, that's not an experience you want to have. So you're looking for camaraderie. You're looking for people who are going to get along. And really avoid companies or startups and even companies at scale that have institutionalized abusive behavior, because that can be problematic. Let's see. As you're building your startup, you want to build for where the world's going to be, not where the world is. And that means the tools that you're training people on using are the ones that are going to be cutting edge, not only today but tomorrow. So right now, if you're building a startup, everybody should be spending up on generative AI, because you're going to be using that heavily once you go into production, and it's going to couch how you staff up. Generative AI can significantly supplement your workforce, and one of the real issues with startups is a tendency to overhire and have to do early layoffs. Recognize that layoffs are having to terminate people, break the team, create distrust. Make it very hard for you to meet your objectives. So it's actually better to be a little understaffed than overstaffed if you have to cut people because you've got too many, because that can really destroy the working relationship you have with people and cause all kinds of problems. So making sure your staffing is reasonable is important. And generative AI here can make a huge difference in terms of not requiring you actually have to staff up in so many jobs. You can use the generative AI to cover and to do some of the facial stuff now. But as we go into the future, face-to-face stuff, as we go into the future, it's going to be a heavy component of any company. And so you want to recognize that when you finally get out and you're in full production, you're dealing with the world that will exist then, not the world that exists now. And so you're training up that way. You're thinking through those mechanisms, particularly when it comes to developing demand and eventually selling your product. And then finally, be careful of partners. The so many startups I've seen fail because they've gone into some larger company. They do a great dog and pony show as far as convincing the larger company that they've got the next best thing, and then they turn around and the larger companies doing it without them, and they've lost any access to their intellectual property. Yeah, they can go into litigation and try to recover, but they're going against a company that can easily spend $3, $4, $5 million in litigation when you're trying to pay the rent. So that they'll just run you out of money. So keep your secrets close to your vest early on. Be careful when you're working with larger firms that you don't share, that you don't overshare, and they walk away with your stuff. A common mistake. A lot of great little companies I've seen that failed because a larger company has just taken their idea and run with it and said, yeah, we don't need you anymore because we think we can do better than you were doing, and so why should we need to partner with you? So keep it close to the vest and recognize that your ideas need to remain your own until you're at a scale where you're large enough to defend them, and then you can share a bit more. But when you're small, your ability to be buried by litigation is incredibly high, and so you need to keep your ideas and your concepts close to the vest. And I'll pass over to Jason. I don't envy Jason doing a startup in farming. I've owned a farm in my past history, and you couldn't get me to do farming again in the current environment. Just way the hell too many risks. So Jason, you're on.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. I mean, I do it modestly, and it's not I don't depend on it as my living, my income, because I can't, because the math isn't there. I did the market research, and what works with the startup so far, it has a possibility. And the idea of positioning for where the world will be is kind of what I agree with the way I've positioned my startup in particular, because it hasn't worked in the past and it doesn't work in the present, but I believe it's positioned to work in the future. And that the fourth dimension of 4D is time, right? There's width and length and height, and then the fourth dimension is time, because time affects things. And you kind of just the idea is that time and space are different expressions of functionally a similar thing, is kind of like pressure and temperature. There's a relationship, though they're not identical. You can't always transform one to the other, but there is a relationship, and so mind your time and economize the time by bringing, having people and technologies that get things done fast, because that's where you'll get your competitive advantage. Eric mentioned that the small companies sometimes will run circles around the big companies, and it's because they have that adaptability, because they have that ability to change directions faster. And so there are so many comments to pick up on that I wanted to just make some comments about culture building, if I could. Just like, to understand the role of business is to bring people together, right? To understand that there are many group definition energies that occur in society, that you can look at a variety of group sort of commonalities, things that people have as a group identifier, and that it's widely known that politics are divisive, and it's widely known that religions can be divisive, and it's widely known that generations can be divisive, and there are so many things that can be divisive, and that the idea of commerce actually derives from the French word of common mercy, the two words, the word smash, for the common gratitude, for the appreciation of each other, and for the appreciation of assets. Actually, appreciation as an economic concept is both about the material and the good, but it's also about the counterparty. That works within your team, and that works to your audience, and that works to your operating environment and the culture that it's embedded in. And to understand the nature of property is something that is it's a fiction of law. To understand that any property anywhere, doesn't matter where you are, anywhere in the world, if it's construed as property somewhere, conceptually, then that's an artifact of your culture. That is a construct of law that you got to do the paperwork the way they demand, even if there's an unreasonable amount of administrative burden. At times there are unreasonable amounts of administrative burden placed on this sort of thing, and that Use AI for that sort of stuff. Automate what's possible, at least, or like outsource it if it's not the thing that only you can do and you can afford. If there's any way you can get somebody else to do the part that you don't have to do, just do the part that you have to do. I would recommend that to get your competitive advantages. Know your competitive advantage as well as a culture. Not just, don't keep it a secret for yourself as the founder. And as far as office romance, like relationships go, I would say understand the power equality. That the definition of this one, or not the definition, but the first question to identify in any potential like people catching feelings, it's contagious. Identify the power dynamic between, and say if they are of equal power and sufficient, and that there's potential room for them to make distance if necessary, then you might have like a yellow light to proceed with caution. I mean, if there's a power imbalance, if one has clearly more power than the other, then I think that's a no to start. And that as well, if there's no room for separation as a possibility, I would think that's a no to start as well. Because you might as well put key person insurance on this one. If that's one of the possibilities. I think that the culture of the organization will become like family if it isn't already to start. I think that Eric identified order of operations logic to say you should build the culture before you build the company, instead of building a company and trying to put culture into it, right? The culture is the starting place, and that if the company is successful enough to have staying power for a long time, the people who are involved will be like family in the end anyway, in some sense, and that there's more than one type of love. That erotic love is only one of them, one of the 6 types of love, and that be comfortable with the possibility of there being love that is not just erotic, and that expect that, and that make sure that those are all in place before you're willing to go there. That would be the third sort of question to say, like, is it a possibility? And that, you know, it's a better life to work with your friends. It's a better life to work with your family. It's a better life to work with people that you love enough that you trust and they trust you, like that. You have staying power with your team. You have good team chemistry like that. And win, lose, or draw, you have sort of a moral victory. That there's a way to win in any circumstance, kind of like the Stoic way, right? They would say that, the Stoics would say that the first rule of justice is to not be that way, right? Live better than what you think is wrong. Live better than that. And that be close to the people that you are forced to be around, right? You're going to be surrounded by people. It's better to be your friends and your family. And if there's like a relationship in that, if there's people dating or something, starting a relationship and dating or something, then those sweet choppy waters, and it's not worth blowing up the ship over that kind of thing. Usually there are plenty of efficiency usually, and that actually I want to build on Rob's point about abusive management. Sometimes the temptation is there for someone to start a startup, mostly motivated. They're not even self-aware to this effect, but they're mostly motivated by the idea of being the boss, and they kind of like the idea of just being in charge, of just being the boss, and that you'll see that in their behavior, that more than doing the work, more than being focused on doing the work, they're focused on sort of barking at people and just like living the life of being the boss, and that's what they want to do, and that's pretty hollow, right? So if you see some things like that, if a person shows you who they really are, trust that, okay? If you see, don't try to change people like that. If they're like that, you can give them a nudge and keep them in bounds. You give them a nudge, and if they stay in bounds based on a gentle nudge, then that's good. But if you try to give someone a nudge and they just don't change, and that's what they're like an abusive manager, don't expect them to change, right? Just make distance.
Thank you. Mr. David Schumacher, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sharif. A lot of good comments here today on advisors, culture, changing landscape. I think I want to go back for my closing remarks and focus on, if you've got somebody listening to the show that has an idea, that they want to put into a startup, do the market research, validate the idea that you have, make sure you know who the target audience for this product or service is, and understand what their needs and preferences are. You need to really make sure that this idea is not just a good idea in your head, but there's people out there that are willing to pay for that. When it comes to that, the second part is the business plan. You've done your market research. Create a comprehensive business plan that outlines your vision, your goals, who this target market is, what your strategies are going to be. Set out some financial projections and write some plans. How do you plan to get this done? Because this will allow you to be able to look back at what you have in your mind as far as your startup is concerned. And you need to be able to sell these ideas to investors, advisors, to employees, especially key employees. Start with these two things. So that would be my advice for any young entrepreneur out there that has this idea, because it will save you a lot of grief in the end, and it'll probably change and mold what your ideas and concepts are as you go through the process. Hopefully that will be useful, and hopefully you'll have a successful startup. And with that, thank you, Sharif, for another great show today.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. David Schumacher. Mr. Eric, what's your concluding remarks for today?
The biggest thing to keep in mind that strategy for startups is not like brick and mortar business. My first business blew up because one of the members kept trying to apply standard business practices to a startup company, and the practices aren't how you adapt and roll. So, he was like, oh, we need a detailed 5-year business plan. Like, we don't know where we're going to be in 5 years. So we preferred Canvas, which did everything in the business plan. It just got the idea that, yeah, we're going to take our best shot. We're going to say we want to go here, but we have to keep adjusting that path. So the biggest thing in startup companies is keeping momentum going. So your planning needs to be momentum based. Say, here's eventually where we want to get to. Here's where we think we can get more or less in the first year. And it was really based on what are we going to do in the next 90 days? 90 days, enough time to make a change and measure it. And it's clear everybody likes 90 days. What can we do in 90 days? It seems to be the optimum. And so the idea is doing and tracking, every week, every month for 90 days and saying, where do we go? And then adjust for the next 90 days. So be just my thing is you think about planning and adapting differently in this idea that you figure out everything and you're actually going to get, a 5-year plan for a startup company is kind of pie in the sky because no one's done it before. You don't have anything to draw on. You don't have the data to do it. So you want to say, here's where we think we can go, and you want to run all the numbers. You want to think through everything you can, but you really need to focus on momentum and the journey of getting there. And there's a lot of the last thing I just like to leave is there's a lot of good areas. Healthcare. I mean, startup companies led the ability to use database medicine. What really works and what not by using data as opposed to what do people feel and think. Artificial AI. Rob brought that up. Sustainability and clean energy. That's up. Financial technology. Going nuts right now. Educational, remote learning's change. Cybersecurity, of course. How do you get workers in remotely, onboard them, all that? Ag tech is going crazy right now for soil and things like coconuts. Peat takes a long time to build and, is a big one of our carbon dioxide, taken care of. And so coconuts are going crazy. Robotic harvesting, not there yet, not profitable, but a lot of work going in that. Vertical stacking, growing differently in dimensions. So a lot of that. And now you've got SpaceX and all that base technologies. So there's a lot of new ideas to go on. But momentum planning, that's what I'd say. You got to change your planning to maximize momentum.
Thank you. Mr. Rob, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Well, startups are hard. Some of the worst and some of the best experiences I've had have been working at startups, and you really have to gauge your tolerance for pain early on. If you don't have much tolerance for pain, you don't want to work long hours. A startup really isn't for you. And if it's your first job coming out of school, recognize there are a lot of skills you're going to need that the startup probably won't teach, at least not initially. So it's often better to do a startup after you've worked for a more mature company first, so you kind of have an understanding how companies work. Often when kids are coming out of school, they have no fundamental knowledge for how a company works. And when I say company works, what the different parts of the company do, how they interrelate, how they contribute to the bottom line, and how your own behavior has to be moderated in a company environment so that you don't lose your career before it's even gotten started. I just was looking at a survey just a week or so ago where they indicated that the Generation Z employees were being fired at an incredibly high rate within 2 to 3 weeks of being hired at an unusual percentage. So that indicating that the kids are coming out of school without the necessary core skills to survive a business environment. And if you get a critical mass of those untrained people in a startup, the startup's going to fail. There's just no doubt in my mind. It's just wheels are going to come off the wagon and it's going to fail. So you need to make sure that you develop core business skills, core skills, and how to interrelate, how to work with others, particularly how to work with and around people of the opposite sex, and know what your defenses are, know what your options are, and recognize that abuse in all of its forms is not a part of working. You don't have to tolerate it. You have options, and you can certainly go and work someplace else. But doing a startup with no experience is incredibly dangerous. You do need at least some baseline experience in the environment, in a working environment. Otherwise, you're going to make a ton of mistakes that would otherwise be avoidable, and all those mistakes will be expensive not only for you personally, but for the company at large. So go into a startup with your eyes open. It can be a ton of fun. As I mentioned, some of the relationships I've had with startups have lasted decades. You really form some very close relationships during them, but you can also experience some really nasty stuff. And knowing when to leave, what's that old thing? That no one to hold them, no one to fold them, no one to walk away. I think it can make a huge difference. Do not feel that you need to ride through something that is abusive or hostile. Take care of yourself and your family. And that's my final comment.
Thank you, Mr. Jessel. What's your concluding remarks?
Thank you. I think the discussion was awesome today. I think that the points made were really expert and really worth it, and that we didn't repeat each other really quite. So this is all killer, no filler right here, you know. I think that the one thing I would add is there is an illusion about the autonomy of authority, to think that by being in charge, you can kind of do whatever you want, that it's all your choice. The fact of the matter is, the more authority and responsibility a person has, the fewer choices they actually have. That the person who is duty bound to the most stakeholders has the least degrees of freedom in terms of what how they're actually going to spend their time, or what they're actually going to do or not do. And that's important to know, that if what you want in life is to have all of the possibilities available to you and to be able to make any choice you want, then the important thing to do is to ensure that there are few stakeholders connected to your future decision, and be like a surfer bum, even if you don't surf. So if you want to be the startup founder, understand that you're sacrificing very much of your freedom, not gaining it. Probably not. You're going to, like, as John Perry Barlow said, read John Perry Barlow, everybody. And read John Perry Barlow's 25 rules for life. And I believe it's rule 12. We all belong to each other. Everybody can only identify each other. We can only identify ourselves as the name of a relationship. Think about it. Anything you'd call yourself, whether it's brother or son or father or uncle or employee or contractor or customer, or it doesn't matter what you'd call yourself, the name you give that is a relationship, and we belong to that relationship. So if you want your freedom, be a surfer bum. And if you want to be committed to things, start a startup. Be a leader. That's my final comment for today.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining today's sessions. World Talent Economy Forum also developing entrepreneur ecosystem in emerging economy. So thank you all of our speakers, those who continuously support and train our entrepreneurs. And hopefully our collaboration can bring more progress for the emerging economy. Thank you everyone. I request all of our audience, please share our content with the government agency, corporation and academy. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.